how do you maintain desire in a relationship when you are stressed, right? And I think that that is like a very, very important question because what happens is that when we experience stress, so, I'm sure you know that, it's that fight or flight response, right?
Right.
When we're stressed, we have all of our cortisol is going, our hormones are going to kind of keep us so that we don't get eaten up by that lion, right? So that's when we're in that fight or flight response. And so if we are in a constant state of stress, it actually decreases arousal, decreases desire, right? Because we have that negative feedback mechanism. So what happens is when we are in a constant state of stress, we have increased cortisol levels. And when we get aroused and when we experience desire, cortisol also goes up. But if we are in a chronic state of stress, that cortisol we have that negative feedback loop, right? And so that cortisol level is going to be suppressed. And so
Attention all international medical students and graduates. Are you looking to improve your residency competitiveness and achieve your dream program match? Look no further. Introducing the 2023 IMG Roadmap course, the online program that will boost your personal and professional growth. This comprehensive course offers live cohort-based coaching from a seasoned expert, me, along with personalized feedback, templates, and even demos. You'll leave with a solid understanding of your personalized IMG journey and the skills you need to enhance it. You'll ditch the overwhelm, and the best part, you can learn at your own pace from anywhere in the world. Whether you're a first-year medical student or a graduate seeking concise, practical coaching to improve your CV, this is the perfect investment for a successful career in the US. The IMG Roadmap is here. Be the first to know when the doors open in April of 2023. Sign up right now at drninaloom.com/waitlist. Again, that's drninaloom.com/waitlist. The IMG Roadmap is the only podcast dedicated to coaching international medical graduates in success blueprints for this unique pathway. I am Dr. Nina Loom, your host, a previous IMG turned hospital medicine physician, healthcare administrator, speaker, and coach. I empower, encourage, and equip you with actionable steps that you can take towards the residency position of your dreams. Hello, guys, and welcome to another episode of the IMG Roadmap podcast. Today, we're speaking about something that you may want to cringe a little bit at, but I think it's very important. I know we're always talking academics. We're always talking, how to achieve this goal and that goal and the other thing. But there's a part of our lives that I think we can so easily neglect. And then when it comes time for us to realize how much we've neglected it, it's been so long and it takes a longer time to catch up. You may be wondering what I'm talking about, but right now it's love season. Everywhere you turn, there's hearts and roses and red petals all around you. So I invited a special guest today. She's not an IMG, but she has 22 years plus of experience as a physician, training other people around something really special. So welcome, Dr. Lodhi. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today, and I would love for you to introduce yourself to our guest today.
Hi, Dr. Loom, and thank you for having me on. I truly appreciate the opportunity to be speaking to your guests and to your viewers and to your listeners, your audience. My name is Dr. Sadaf Lodhi. I am an OBGYN, board certified, and I am also an intimacy coach. And so I help people with perhaps their negative beliefs surrounding sex and relationships. And we look at ways to move forward and how to improve their relationships with their partners or their spouses.
I love that you do this work because I feel like in medicine, especially when we are transitioning from one phase of our medical career to the other, it's so easily to neglect your interpersonal relationships and focus on your work. So whether that is like studying for USMLE Step 3 or, trying to get into residency or trying to get into fellowship or trying to be an attending for the first time, all those pivotal moments seem to cloud our judgment for everything else. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, the people to suffer the most are the ones that are the closest to us, right? So whether they're our family, whether they're our spouses, our partners, whatever, it could be anyone. And I feel like those personal relationships are the ones that suffer because we're so focused on trying to get into a residency. And once we're in it, then the rigor of that residency begins. So we just don't have, we don't even have time for ourselves, right? And so
Right.
let alone trying to make time for others, it becomes very difficult. So yeah, it's such an important part of our lives and really important to try to focus and take some time to really spend time with the people that we love and show them that we care about them as much as we care about our training. And so I just have a few things that I think that might be helpful for anyone that might be listening.
Yes, absolutely. So I would like us to get into it because I've been perusing your website, and guys, we'll have all her information in the show notes. But her website is drsadaf.com. And it's just so inviting, especially as a woman, as a physician. I know that you help so many people navigate intimacy as a life coach, as a sex coach, as an executive coach. But, I know that you have a model that you want to share with us today as to how we can approach improving our relationships, our lives, and interpersonal relationships, especially. So do you want to share some of your nuggets with us?
Absolutely. Thank you. I'd love to. So I will just get into it, I think. So while, we're talking about maintaining sexual health while preparing for a career to be a resident physician or a fellow or your first year out as an attending, I think it's really important to kind of assess each part of our lives, right? So we have, as we take a look at it, a lot of different, I would say, different, even like the female sexual response cycle, it takes into account a model that's called the biopsychosocial model of health. And the reason why that's important is because it addresses the pivotal points in our health and really in our well-being. And so when we talk about the bio part of it, we're talking about the usual, the usual things that you go see a physician for. So it could be your annual exam, it could be like your screening. And so while we're in residency or, an attending or whatever, a resident, a fellow, I think it's really important to make sure that we're keeping up and maintaining our appointments with our primary care provider, right? So keeping our GYN appointment, getting tested for sexually transmitted infections, if you don't have like one partner, and deciding, if you want contraception. There, being a resident, a fellow, or a first time attending is a very stressful time in our lives. And so you may not be thinking about a family right away. And so it's so important that if you're thinking about a contraception, that you discuss that with your gynecologist or your, whoever that may be, or your primary care provider. Also making sure that whenever you have any type of sexual contact, if you are not considering getting pregnant, then, I would encourage people to always wear a condom just because they want to protect themselves against sexually transmitted infections. And of course, there are people that, do decide that they want to get pregnant and think that this might be a good time to do that. And so if that's the case, then you want to make sure that you're taking your prenatal vitamins and your folic acid. And of course, depending on your age, and since I'm a gynecologist, my focus is always toward women, but that you want to make sure that you get your mammogram, your pap smear, et cetera. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about the biological part of it.
Okay.
So the psychological part. So, this is actually something that a lot of times we overlook and I think is super, super important, right? And that's how is your mental health? right? And we don't usually ask that of others, but I think it's very important to assess that for ourselves and about ourselves, right? So are we anxious? Are we depressed? Are we stressed? A lot of times, especially if you go away for your residency, you may feel depressed, right? You may, and I think you mentioned this yourself, is that, a lot of people feel isolated. They don't have a community that they used to be a part of. And so because of that, they may experience depression, they may have some anxiety, they may have stress, they may have homesickness, right? Especially if their
Right.
home is far away.
Yeah.
And so then what I think is really important is for people to get very granular with their feelings, right? So when we say stressed, that's very vague. And so it's hard for somebody to help us out when we talk about, like, oh, I'm stressed. But if you say that, I'm really overwhelmed, or I'm frustrated, or that, I have so much going on and I don't know how to prioritize or how to manage my time, then we can find a solution, right? Then we
Right.
can figure out ways to help each other and for that person to get help. But, and that's what I mean when I say, to get granular with our feelings, because the more we can describe what it is that's bothering us, that's really upsetting us, then we can find solutions to that, and seek help and get the help that we need. Also, I think it's important to get a therapist, right? I almost feel like everyone should have a therapist. I have a therapist, and it's so important, right? You can't always depend on, say, like your friends to talk about everything that's bothering you. They may be busy as well. They may be stressed. They may have their own issues going on, right? So it's
Right.
important to have somebody that is dedicated to the field that could help you with the emotions and the things that are running around in your mind, the thoughts that you have. Perhaps you have imposter syndrome, right? Which is very common for everyone, I think. I think everyone at some point in their life goes through that. And you may want to be able to discuss that with somebody. And I think a therapist is always so helpful to have. And it's good to know where you can get help. I think also coaching is important. Sometimes you get stuck. Sometimes you start up a residency or a fellowship and you realize, like, oh my gosh, this isn't really what I want, like this isn't what I was thinking, or it isn't really what I was hoping it would be. And so then you may have some type of grief even. And so then coaching is important because coaches actually help you to move forward, right? So therapists are people that you kind of discuss about your past and perhaps some traumas or things like that you may have had in your life. Whereas coaches, basically, they kind of deal a little bit with your past, but then they will help you move forward. So everything is about moving forward, right? So how do I move forward in my life? And so that's why a coach may be helpful in terms of that. And make sure that you're keeping up with your relationships with yourself and with others. And that actually brings me right into my next aspect of this biopsychosocial model, and which is the social aspect, right? Try to maintain and keep friendships. And I know that is super hard. I mean, even as an attending myself and been attending for a while now, I find it very, very difficult to maintain relationships and friendships outside of my, main family here,
Right.
my nuclear family. And even it's hard to maintain that relationship just with your parents or your siblings, even, let alone, friends outside of that nucleus that you have. But it's going to be, especially when you're going through a stressful time, such as residency and fellowship, it's going to be so important to have an outlet and to maintain these friendships and to seek out new friends, right? So a lot of times when you start a residency, when you're going through something as stressful as that, it's nice to have some co-residents that are going through exactly the same thing that you are. And so that you have a bond right there, and that they can also help you in times of, when you may be having a difficult time in residency, or if you had a hard day or something like that. It may be helpful to have somebody that's very near, physically to you, so that you can reach out to them. Because especially if you're a foreign medical grad, right, your family is far away. You don't have that tight nuclear family that you perhaps relied on when you were applying for fellowships and residencies and things like that. So here you are in a new country, in a new place, in a new location, and you don't have that support system that perhaps you did in your own home. And so that's why it's going to be important to put yourself out there, right? Even if you're an introvert, it's really important to try to put yourself out there, because that's the only way you're going to meet new friends, right? And seek out people that have similar interests as you. So, for example, if you want to be part of a community, right? Whether it's a religious community, or say that you have a special interest, like you like biking or running or something like that, find those local communities near you so that you have some people that you can rely on, right? So, although you may have left your family and friends in your country of origin, you're putting yourself out there, you're making new friends, you're forming new communities and new networks. And that's what's really going to be helpful, especially when you have those hard, difficult days, right?
Right.
And I think that's why that's so important. Also, it's super important, and there have been multiple studies that have showed this, that if you walk outdoors at least 2 hours a day, or actually more than that, actually 2 hours a week rather. And that really helps with your mental health, with your mood. And so then maybe set a time for yourself, right? So even if you're just walking outside to your car and to the hospital, maybe take 5 more minutes and walk around the hospital, right? And get some fresh air. Take some time to be with yourself, practice some mindfulness. All of those things will help out not only your mood, but also your mental health, so that you have clarity when you go on to your next day, when, your next project or whatever that might be.
Right.
I think exercise is so, so important, especially in residency. When I was a resident, I used to make sure that, I always exercised at least as much as I could. Being an OBGYN is a pretty tough residency, but if you're able to set aside even a half hour, right? So I think the American Heart Association says you need a half hour of vigorous exercise, something that increases your heart rate for 5 days out of the week. So if you can at least commit to even just a half hour for 5 days a week, just to exercise, right? Whether it's and that could just be like speed walking. If you're not able to actually go and increase your heart rate too much, maybe, like we talked about, just go for a walk outside, or, do as much as you can, right? So don't overwhelm yourself, but try to get outside, try to exercise a little bit, so that it helps with some mental clarity and with your physical being, right? Exercise is always very helpful and very, very important for our mental and physical health. And lastly, for the social part of it, and I also have a little bit more that I'm going to talk about in terms of maintaining relationships. But in terms of the social aspect, I think it's also very important to read books, right?
Right.
And read books that are outside of your niche. So, you may be whatever, women's health provider. So you're always constantly reading about, obstetrics and gynecology and things like that. But try to read books that are not having to do with medicine. Try to maybe read some books on business, or read books on, mental health or positive intelligence or something like that. I mean, a book that I just picked up recently that I'm very excited to read is called Soundtracks. And it's basically about things that we tell ourselves, right? So that things that we tell ourselves over and over again that become like this soundtrack that's on rewind in our head. And so I think that that's important to make sure that you're keeping up and that you're reading, because that's going to also give you a little bit of an escape from the daily grind of being a fellow or resident or an attending. And
I absolutely
yes, go
love.
ahead.
No, I absolutely love I was just going to say, I absolutely love the biopsychosocial model, because it's in many ways all encompassing. It embraces all the different parts of us. And as you were speaking, I was just like, wow, if we could approach life and just our self-care following that model, I think that would really take us places as far as our personal joy, health, and overall outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I agree with you 100%. And I think that, it's so important because, like you said, it does address every aspect of our life. And I think that if we can at least pay attention to a little bit of each one of those categories, then I think that that would, keep us whole. And as, when we are going through something so rigorous as our training, I think it's important to remember that, we are individuals and we need care as well, right? It's hard to always care for others, but then we tend to forget about ourselves. And it's important to allow ourselves that time and energy to care for ourselves. And one of the things that I did want to stress, since this is, February and Valentine's Day is approaching and things like that, is, how do you maintain desire in a relationship when you are stressed, right? And I think that that is like a very, very important question, because what happens is that when we experience stress, so, I'm sure that, it's that fight or flight response, right?
Right.
When we're stressed, we have all of our cortisol is going, our hormones are going to kind of keep us so that we don't get eaten up by that lion, right? So that's when we're in that fight or flight response. And so if we are in a constant state of stress, it actually decreases arousal, decreases desire, right? Because we have that negative feedback mechanism. So what happens is when we are in a constant state of stress, we have increased cortisol levels. And when we get aroused and when we experience desire, cortisol also goes up. But if we are in a chronic state of stress, that cortisol we have that negative feedback loop, right? And so that cortisol level is going to be suppressed. And so although we need a little bit of cortisol when we get aroused or have desire, that cortisol will be suppressed. So we may not be able to experience that desire or that arousal because our cortisol is being suppressed, because we're always under a state of stress.
Right.
And so that's why it's really important to remember that and think, and remember that there's not anything wrong with us. It's just the situation that we're in that puts us in this chronic state of stress that's decreasing our arousal, decreasing our desire. And that's why that's so important to know and understand. And so then, how do you manage that, right? How do you increase that desire? How do we increase desire in our relationships? And I think one of the important things that we can do is make each other a priority, right? So try to make your partner, your significant other, a priority in your life, right? Just as we make priorities for work and our fellowship and our training, we need to set up dates with our spouse. And I know that, contrary to what media tells us and, what with the images that we see is that everything is supposed to be spontaneous, but that's not really the case, right? And there's something called sexual intelligence, which is very important to understand. And that basically states that relationships are going to look different at different phases in our life, right? So perhaps when we're new in a relationship, everything is more spontaneous and maybe it seems like not that much effort is being put in, and everything is just happening and everything's great, fantastic. But as we get further along in our relationships and, decades pass, things may seem a little bit monotonous. And so we may not have that excitement anymore, right? And so how do we create that excitement? So then it's at that point that it behooves us to make our relationship a priority and set up dates with our significant other and spend time with each other. And when you're with that person, to put away your phone, right? Nobody likes to be, I'm sure, you've probably seen people when you're at a restaurant that, you see them together, but they're really not together. They're staring at their phones. And it's just so awful, right? Because they can't even, they set aside time for themselves or for each other, but they're not even talking to each other. They're staring at their phones. And so one rule that we have in my family is that when we are at the dinner table, when we're together, we put away our phones. Nobody's allowed to take out their phone. And I think that that's so important because that shows the other person that they are important, that they mean a lot, and that you're not going to be distracted by something else showing up on your phone, but rather you would take that time and spend it with them. Right.
Right.
So that's why I think it's so, so important that when you're with somebody, to actually be with that person, to be mindful when you're with them and spend time with them that's really meaningful. Also, there's something called sensate focus. And when we are, with our significant other, our partner, whoever, somebody that's very important to us. And, a lot of times I get the question like, when I'm with my partner, I'm not really aroused and it just becomes very difficult. And, I'm not really focused and I'm thinking about all the other things that I have to get done. And, and so then they're asking me, well, what can I do about my decreased arousal, decreased desire? And again, mindfulness comes in. So, mindfulness is like this great practice that if we learn it, we can apply it to so many different aspects of our life. So not only when you're with your partner, but even when you start to become intimate with your partner, right? Is to practice that mindfulness because, and if we get into it, and I'm not going to get into it too much into it right now, but we have what's called the female sexual response cycle. And it states that not only do you have to look at the biopsychosocial model of somebody, when they are in a relationship, but that usually arousal comes first and then desire comes. And it's a circular model, and it was developed by Rosemary Basson in 2001, I believe. And what she states is that for women desire that emotional intimacy. We desire connection with our partner. And so it's not just about, how do you increase desire, but it's having that connection, right? And how do you build that connection? Well, you build that connection with mindfulness, but also that you need something that is going to arouse you. And it can be, it can be anything. It can be being close with somebody. It can be, being intimate with them. And then you'll notice that the arousal comes first and then the desire comes, because we have to be in that mind, in that frame of mind, right? And that only comes when we are able to practice that mindfulness. And that mindfulness is basically being present wherever you are, right? Is being present in the moment without any type of judgment. And so if you can practice that when you're with your partner, when you're with your spouse, when you're being intimate with your partner, then everything happens, because what you're doing is you're focusing on that sensation. And this is where the sensate focus comes in. So basically the sensate focus means that you're using your senses to feel, to touch, to smell, to really be present in the moment. So when you are with somebody, when you're intimate with somebody, that you're really present. And when you're focusing on your senses, then you're able to touch, like, how does that touch feel? How does that smell feel? How does that taste feel? And so then automatically that arousal happens and then that desire happens. And so then you can be more in that moment with your partner, and that you can enjoy the time that you're having with that partner, right? And another thing that's really important is, and we talked a little bit about this, is that, prioritizing each other and setting aside time to be with one another. And one of the most important things is be willing to discuss difficult feelings with each other. So there is another great author that I enjoy. Her name is Emily Nagoski, and she wrote the book called Come As You Are. And she discusses, being able to talk with your partner about difficult feelings. And I think that communication, of course, as you know, is one of the most important things to have in a relationship and in a friendship. And of course, with your most intimate partner. And when you have that communication, right? When you have that open communication, it's going to be so important to be able to discuss those difficult feelings that you may have with one another, right? So, for example, if you have somebody that's a resident, that's a fellow, that's an attending, and if their partner is not in medicine, and even if they are in medicine, say that you have different, types of specialties, right?
Right.
They may come to resent their partner's specialty, right? Or they may come to resent all the time that they are taken away from their family, from
Right.
their relationship. And then they may start to harbor those difficult feelings. So
Right.
it's so important when we have these relationships to be able to discuss those feelings, right? In an open and honest way, so that these feelings don't build up. And so that we don't start like stonewalling each other or, not talking to one another for days or weeks and things like that, so that the whole relationship crumbles, right?
Right.
So I think that, some of these things, if we can practice them and implement them in our lives, in our everyday lives, and, continue the conversation of communication with our partners, I think that that is, what will lead to stronger relationships. And a lot of times for people, this very difficult time actually brings them together, right? Because with their significant other or their spouse, because it really forces them to be more intentional when they have time with each other, because they may have limited time with one another, right? If they're always on call and things like that. So then the times when they're not on call, they may want to just do things together because that's their alone time.
Right. No, absolutely. I think you've given us several nuggets that we can apply in our lives. And I'm sure that there's a lot more that you could share with us, but for the fact that, that would require more time. But I just want to summarize for the listener today who is dealing with, you're an IMG and you're far from home, or you're married and have children and felt like you've neglected a certain part of your life, your interpersonal relationships, your intimacy, maybe even family. It doesn't always have to be intimate with a lover or a husband or a wife. It could be your close friends and family as well. Definitely, I think the pearls from today's podcast is to incorporate Dr. Sadaf's model here that allows you to approach your life. And it's almost like as important as self-care. And I think this is all about self-care, but approaching
Absolutely.
your life from this biopsychosocial model where you're keeping your health up to date, you're keeping your health maintenance appointments. Psychologically, you're getting granular with your feelings, speaking with a therapist if you can afford it, employing coaching into your life if you can afford it. And then the social aspect, which is just realizing that you are a well-rounded person and you can maintain, whether it's by phone calls, spending time together, keeping your phone away, and all those things put together can indeed influence, for those that are actively in sexual relationships, it can influence and affect your desire for your partner, and even just augment your desire to develop your sexual relationship a little bit further. And this is the season for it. It's February. Everyone's talking about love and Valentine's Day. And I think that as doctors, we just don't have this conversation enough. We just don't prioritize this because I usually think we're dealing with life and death situations. So there's just no time to think about anything else. But I think it's time that we start to take care of ourselves. And this is one way that we can incorporate that, even if we're studying for an exam, even if we feel like, this is more important. My career is more important right now, but you don't want to have years pass you by and your family resents you for this career that you've pursued. So thank you so much, Dr. Lodhi, for coming on the podcast today. I know that some people may want to continue this conversation. I know you're also a podcaster. So tell us where we can get more information on what kind of information and services that you offer.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Loom, for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and have the ears of your listeners. So I have, as you stated before, I have a website called drsadaf.com. And also I am on social media. So my social media handles are Dr. Sadaf OBGYN on both Instagram and TikTok. On Instagram, I have a little over 2,000 followers. On TikTok, I have about a little over 120,000 followers. So I think that this topic, I speak a lot about sexual health and wellness on my social media. And I think it resonates with a lot of people because, like you said, we don't talk about it. It's, we just think that a lot of times people may think it's a taboo topic that you don't discuss, but I think it's important to talk about these things, right? Important to talk about how to improve your relationships. And I think it's very, very important. People can definitely go on my website to set up one-on-one consultations. I also have group coaching. that I do. So definitely, I would love to have people reach out. And if they feel that this is something that's very important, and I think it is, I think that, relationships and intimacy are very important. And it's important to practice mindfulness when you're in your relationships. But, come work with me and we can see what may be some limiting beliefs that, a person may have and how we can improve and move them forward in their relationships.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it was my pleasure to have you guys. And so, listen, if you are interested in anything we talked about today and you want to learn more, or you just want to gain maybe a little bit more time and just dedicate 10-20 minutes of your week to your personal well being, I will put all her links in the show notes so that you can go on there and listen to her podcast. Maybe if you want to book a session with her, you can also do that. We'll make sure all her contacts are in the show notes, guys. And if you're listening, wherever you are, rate this podcast. Let us know the kind of information that's beneficial for you and your personal growth so that we can get you more hosts just like Dr. Lodhi. Thank you, Dr. Lodhi, for being on here. You are appreciated.
Thank you so much, Dr. Luma. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Look at you. I'm so proud of you for listening until the very end. And because of that, you deserve a reward. And I want you to go right now to drninaloom.com and download any of my free ebooks, whether it's for electives or clinical rotations, or even just whatever trials come your way as you navigate your IMG journey. Stay tuned for another episode coming up next.